Good morning, friends. Tashin here, coming to you from South Brooklyn. Feels good to be back in Brooklyn. I'll be here for most of the month for, amongst other things, Vibetober, this bottom-up emergent gathering of teapot friends, friends in the network. Yeah, it's been a while since I made a video, and at least a public one, and I want to make one now. And one thing that's been on my mind that I thought I'd talk about today is what, for lack of a better term, I would call Socratic learning conversations. And I do think I alluded to this or talked a little bit about it in a recent video about types of conversations. But this month I'm doing an experiment with a friend where we're going to have 3 or 4 calls as intentional Socratic learning conversations, because over the years that I've known this friend, we've done a bunch of these sort of unintentionally or spontaneously, and so we're exploring doing that a bit more intentionally. And I've felt really privileged to be able to have these conversations in sort of both roles. There's sort of the role of a learner and then a guide. And these conversations have been so fruitful to me, and they've been one of my favorite ways to learn and grow and to connect, and also to share what I have to offer. And I've also been really grateful to recognize consciously that that's what this kind of conversation is, because noticing that gives me permission to have these conversations a bit more intentionally and a bit more frequently, and with a bit more self-awareness of, oh, that's what this is happening right now. So I asked around on Twitter recently if there was a good book to read about these that I could learn about, and Matt Bateman sent one, but I looked at it and it seemed very interested in like pedagogy in schools, or like the school context, and I'm not interested in that. And of course there's Plato, which has been a huge influence on me. I got very obsessed with Plato when I was at St. John's. But that's, that's the genesis of this sort of thing, and a huge inspiration, but also not quite what I'm looking for. I almost want a informational blog post like the kind that I write, but about Socratic learning conversations. So I may have to just write this myself. But for now, I want to talk and reflect on how I think about these and how I go about them, and what, if any, best practices I've found so far for approaching them. I'm sure I'll have a lot more to say at the end of this month after this experiment and after future iterations of such things. I'd like to have a lot more of these conversations. They're so valuable. And let me start with a simple example, which is recently I actually gave 2 of these recently, but I gave a chess lesson recently where I held the intention to give that lesson as a Socratic learning conversation. So I've been interested in chess since I was like 5 or 6, been playing a long time on and off. I'm not amazing, but I do think I'm a good teacher of it. And what I do know, I know pretty well. And a lot of chess lessons that I received were very didactic and very instructive, where it's like, all right, now we're going to learn this or learn that, or let's go through this game, or there's a very structured approach. And I think for me, a Socratic learning conversation really begins with the learner's genuine desire and the learner's genuine interest, which is determined by them. And it's also relational in terms of who they trust to learn with and who they want to learn about the thing that they're interested in. And so in this case, my friend was very interested in chess. It was an active interest for her. And I said, yeah, let's do a chess lesson. And so we did a chess lesson, and rather than holding this sort of didactic frame of I'm going to teach you these specific things, whether it's like end games or mid-game tactics or openings or, review this game or whatever. We played a game and I asked her questions while we played. And that's obviously a really important part of a Socratic learning conversation, is that it's question-based. And I'm still learning about this. I feel like there's a lot of nuance there that I'd like to get better at, and also be better able to articulate exactly what's happening or what works well and what doesn't work well. But there's no point to be made. I'm reminded actually of Visa's story about Dinesh, where early in their working relationship, Visa was late for a meeting, and Dinesh said, "Why were you late?" And Visa assumed that he was sort of in a punishing mode, and he gave some excuses or whatever. And Dinesh was like, "I'm not interested in any of that. I'm not trying to judge you or blame you or shame you. I would like to know, like, what is the reason that you were late? What caused you to be late? What were the causes?" And I guess Visa had been staying up late playing video games. And so then they had a conversation about that. And the point wasn't to punish or shame Visa. It was really to find out information and hear how Visa thought about it and get to the same page. And so similarly, with this chess lesson, I would ask my friend, like, what are you thinking? What do you see on the board? And what do you see about this position? What do you think about your pawns? Or why did you make that move? What was your reasoning for making that move? Not as a gotcha question, not as like, why did you make that move? Not, you shouldn't have made that move. It's just like, no, like, what were you thinking? And what are you thinking about now? What would be a good move? Or what are some different possible moves you could make? Which one looks stronger to you and why? That kind of question. And really letting my friend reason out for herself the answers to the questions, and not needing there to be a right answer, but just giving her an opportunity to reflect and to reason and to be curious about her experience of the chess game. And of course, at different points, it became relevant to say things like, oh, you want to advance your pieces early in the game, or you want to control the center, or whatever. And she might ask questions, right? She might be like, well, what do you think of this? And so I could answer. But all of that was coming from her genuine interest in chess, our friendship, and her trust in me to play chess together and explore, and my willingness to ask questions and be genuinely curious about her thinking and her reasoning, and that being the basis of learning, rather than, I think in the Theaetetus, Plato's Theaetetus, they talk about different metaphors or images for knowledge transfer or learning, and there's sort of this image of like pouring water into someone's head, if I recall correctly. And the point is, like, a lot of people think that learning works this way. It's like, oh, there's information and the teacher just gives it to the student, and if you just say the information, then they'll learn it. And that's like a plausible account of learning, that there's no reason that people think that, because information exchange is part of learning, but it's not sufficient. And I think a Socratic learning conversation is a much more thorough and complete account of what learning is. And it starts with the learner's genuine interest and curiosity and aliveness, and is held in relationship with someone who can meet that specific curiosity, right? There's so many things that I wouldn't be a good Socratic learning partner for about, because I don't know anything about them. And there's so many things I wouldn't be interested in having Socratic learning conversations about right now, because I'm not interested in them at this moment. But the things that I am actively interested in about, I would just love to have Socratic learning conversations about. And when it's within this context with someone I really trust to hold me well and who knows things about the thing I want to learn, I can learn incredibly fast, especially if I ask questions. And so on my end as a learner, I also ask a lot of questions, and I have a really good sense of what questions to ask and what order, and what kinds of questions help me personally learn. And there's almost there's an ownership or a leadership or a strength in just navigating that way. And I really show up with, here are my questions. I'm going to ask this question. Like, I like to ask about stories, like, how did you come to be interested in this? Or, learning about someone's life and holding that context for why they learn about something. Or usually I develop a mental model of a skill tree or a map of concepts, and I start with the ones that are simplest, that I maybe don't understand yet, and then work up to more complex things and build up. And often there's moves of like, well, here's how I understand this currently. What would you reflect about that? And they're like, well, here's some added nuance or complexity. And all of that is meeting me where I am, both in terms of my genuine interest in a topic and my current level of understanding, which is always incomplete, always partial, but often the person I'm talking to will have a more complete learning model or of the thing, or more knowledge that I'd like to learn. And so I would like them to pour it into my head, but it has to be at a rate and in a way and in a manner that works for me, and it has to be directed by the learner and their own current understanding. If someone just tried to talk to me about black holes right now or quantum physics, it's like I don't have much scaffolding to really absorb that information, other than just to let the words pass over me, and maybe some of it sticks or gets remembered. But like, there are many topics that if someone told me more information about, I would already have some context for and some understanding for that would be able to expand my map of the territory. And ideally, of course, over time, my current understanding will reach things like, things that I don't know too much about, like quantum physics or black holes or whatever. As a total aside, I remember my junior year of high school, I started to take physics, and I remember the first day of class, I was so excited because I was like, we're finally going to learn what the universe is and where it comes from, and we're going to talk about the Big Bang and the genesis of the universe and how time works. And finally, someone's going to have answers to all my questions about what the universe is. And we started talking about like levers and gravity of balls dropping and stuff. And it was just so mechanical and so in the weeds and so disinteresting and so not meeting me where I was. I really have had questions for my whole life of like, what is the universe and why are we here? And if they had started there, I would have been so much more interested in physics. And they had no idea because they didn't ask me. And, it was also a group conversation. So that's, of course, a group class, not even a conversation. But that's an important feature of a Socratic learning conversation, is that it's typically a one-on-one conversation. And so someone can meet the individual learner where they are, and that just really accelerates what's possible to learn. And of course, for me, when I'm a learner in these settings, I really go off and use what I learn. So I incorporate into my life. Like, I was learning a bit earlier this year about evolution, for example, and finally felt really interested in that. Thanks to my friend Shanti and my friend Gordon. And I was talking to Gordon quite a bit about evolution and just starting to frame things that I was interested in terms of evolution. How does evolution apply to this? And how could I look at this through a lens of evolution? And that really shifts things and changes the way I approach things. And so whatever I learn, it's not just to get some new perspective or get some new facts or something. It's immediately available through the whole system to use in any context that feels relevant. So I don't know, even chess, for example, right? Like, for me, I had this thread earlier this year about an insight that I had while playing chess about intuition and trusting my intuition and when to use intuition and when to use sort of calculated reasoning. And that's a really valuable insight that cross-applies outside of chess. Like, I learned that lesson and some lessons about that in the context of chess because it was sort of a well-understood problem space that I am very familiar with. But that applies to everything, and I can use intuition and use calculated reasoning in most settings. And so if I have a social problem or a leadership problem or a money problem or whatever it is, I can apply the lessons I learned about intuition and calculated reasoning to those, and they're available through the system. And so the point isn't just to have a vivid, vibrant, interesting conversation. It's really to learn in a way that matters to you and your life and is immediately applicable. And so I just want to be having a lot of these conversations, and I really value the friendships that I have where there's an understanding of what this is and where a friend is willing to meet me in a Socratic learning conversation and hold the learning partner role or the learner role if they want to learn something from me. Maybe there's more like peer forms of these as well, where you're both interested in learning about something and neither of you are experts in it yet, but you're kind of co-exploring and following your curiosity together. That seems certainly possible. And I'd just like to be having a lot more of these conversations, and I'd like to understand them better. Maybe one day I'll write an informational blog post that says some of these things, but with more experience. I think it's premature to be able to write such a thing now. I could create a placeholder for it. That's something I'll often do, is just create a Google Doc and have a placeholder for it and start collecting notes. But for now, there's this video, and I hope it was interesting to you. And here's to this learning experiment that I will do this month with several Socratic learning conversations with my friend. And perhaps you'll hear more in the future, but in the meantime, sending you love.